So welcome to our webcast featuring Spark Lasers of two-photon microscopy. We would like to still wait for some more applicants, but I will start off with an overview what we're gonna listen to today. So I'll start with a short introduction about Laser 2000 and the fields where we're working at, and including the microscopy part. Also, I will give over to my friend Guillaume from Spark Lasers, who will have his talk. And afterwards, we're gonna have a short Q&A session. Please don't hesitate to ask your questions in the chat panel directly. We will try to answer them afterwards right away, and if possible, all of them. So Laser 2000 was not founded in 2000, but 1986 as a distributor for lasers from overseas or other non-German talking countries, to have a representative in German-speaking and countries and Europe. After some while, we expanded to France, the Nordics, and Spain. And we have a lot of other subsidiaries that are working on themselves by now. But if you're interested in any of our products at some point, please don't hesitate to contact us as well. We will forward everything accordingly. We work in several fields, basically all of the photonics fields. We have laser sources from the milliwatt region for example, biophotonics applications, but up to kilowatts for example, laser material processing. We supply your laser safety equipment from goggles to curtains, optical test and measurement systems of all sorts, and components from lenses to scan and motion systems, like also in combination with cameras, machine vision, and also a separate department is basically fiber optics. The idea is to consult and to supply subsystems or whole systems even to our customers. So coming already to the biophotonics parts, just one example we have what our range is. Basically, Spark Lasers, you will hear a lot more about that from Guillaume in a second. Semrock, for example, has optical filters, basically of every kind. Photon systems has spectroscopy systems, especially in the deep UV Raman range. And Oxys, for example, supplies lasers and single frequency lasers for this region, especially also in, for example, combiners, where you can already implement a lot of lasers into one combiner and have that into free space or one fiber. These are just some examples. We have a lot of more to provide in field of biophotonics. Do not hesitate to contact us. But today it is we are talking about Spark Lasers, and I want to introduce to you Mr. Guillaume Bouquet, who will have our short talk today.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar today. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Marco, for the introduction you just made, and obviously thanking Laser 2000 for organizing that webinar, putting us actually as the let's say the presenter today. So we're today going to address a few items here, focusing on two-photon microscopy, obviously, and what actually smart femtosecond fiber lasers can actually do and bring differently to the two-photon microscopy and neuroscience research. I'll first talk about a short introduction about Spark Lasers and our solutions, a few historical records, about microscopy. Why is it that peak power is so predominant for multi-photon microscopy? What are the benefits of smart femtosecond fiber lasers? indeed, let's say, within that neuroscience research. What makes ALCOR such a unique laser range for two-photon microscopy? And then, as Marco just said before, we'll actually go over a Q&A session. Right, short introduction about Spark Lasers, real quick. We basically are a manufacturer for micromachining, but also and indeed biophotonics lasers, from basically picosecond down to very short, ultra fast femtosecond pulse duration lasers, both for spectroscopy and two-photon microscopy, also for optogenetics, basically. So all our lasers within that biophotonics range are actually air-cooled. We can manufacture most of everything between 1 up to 40 watts, IR green UV, QCW or pulse pick lasers, single shot to basically 80 megahertz, including power modulation, synchronization of all kinds, whether internal or external, with basically TTL and analog signals, which is let's say key point for as far as triggering lasers concerned. Low time and jitter, single or dual head system for microscopy, and we will actually obviously put the focus on the dual ALCOR laser range. We're represented worldwide from the United States and Canada onwards to Japan and Australia, and thanks to basically our partners out in Germany, the Nordics, and Iberia, I'd say, with Laser 2000. A few historical recalls on microscopy, real quick. So basically 3 different kinds of microscopy. First one was the compound microscopy and electron microscopy. Well, it was basically, some eye understanding of microscopy. Well, one drawback that was actually an essential one, really. This technique remained basically at the surface of tissues with low resolution contrast and a 1D observation. So from there, we obviously, let's say, market needed and research needed to have basically multidimensional possibilities and capabilities, and that's how basically confocal microscopy was born. Pros of let's say confocal microscopy, well, multiple and 2-dimensional images at different depths, yet pretty close to the surface, enabling reconstruction of 3D structures, optical sectioning within an object and cells, basically, mostly. Cons of it: photo bleaching, background light signal effect, and surface imaging. From there, that's how basically most of basically, within the last 10 years, two-photon excitation microscopy rose up. Some pros here that were actually unequaled back in these years and still pretty much active at the time being. Pros are, let's say, both effects of having basically two-photon effect, leading to an increased penetration depth into the tissues, efficient light detection, low or not at all any photo bleaching, visualization of living tissues at depths basically that weren't achievable back in the years with conventional Watt-and-Photon or confocal microscopy, in vivo, non-invasive 3D imaging with submicron resolution and volume. The cons of all that is that basically, of course, lasers were tunable, big, so basically mostly sapphire lasers that are oversized, water cooled, have a quite high cost of ownership overall, and sapphire basically embedded basically not necessarily interesting wavelengths between 680 up to 300 nanometers with basically low average powers on these edges basically, out of which basically 2 or 3 are really interesting for as far as basically 800, 920, and 1 micron are concerned. Why is it that peak power is so predominant for two-photon microscopy those days, as we tend to basically analyze and get down into tissues more and more? Well, basically peak power and pulse duration is really are the 2 factors on which two-photon microscopy is dependent. When coupling a short pulse duration with basically a low energy, we maximize the peak power. And maximizing peak power is obviously bringing brightness, higher contrast, and better resolution overall. And this is what really matters when we, want to get down into tissues, rebuild in 3D images, and try to understand how cells really work. The maximum details neuroscientists can have, the better the research, because it will absolutely help understand, a lot more things than ever before. So what really matters is to get a short pulse duration coupled and combined with a low pulse energy in order to maximize the peak power, and having a high peak power is what is going to bring more brightness and higher contrast. And that is how basically ALCOR is, rising out for basically some months now. We're reaching basically more than 250 kilowatt of peak power with a 2-watt ALCOR at 920, with brilliant contrast and best contrast, I'd say, and even up to 4 watts right now at 920 nanometers, with basically above 410 kilowatt of peak power at 920, while keeping basically pulse duration that are slightly underneath 100 femtoseconds. One thing yet to be mentioned is that what really is interesting for 2-photon microscopy is to have a pulse duration that is basically comprised between 70 femtoseconds and 100 femtoseconds, in order to avoid let's say nonlinearities of third order, in order not to be disturbing pulse duration, since no GDD precompensation will be able to, let's say, keep the pulse duration equal on samples as it was basically from the laser output. Benefits of smart femtosecond fiber lasers versus traditional tunable lasers. Basically, that is to say, sapphire. Well, sapphire lasers, they're definitely brilliant technology, no doubt about this, given access to, as I said, a wide span of wavelengths. Now, drawbacks for this is that, within, we all know that within basically optical setups, space is really matters. So the drawbacks for these lasers were that they are huge, cumbersome, very expensive. They drive lower powers because of let's say, DPSS, optically based basically architecture. Pulse duration is hardly constant. Let's say at 100 femtosecond, it's more likely that pulse duration is above 110 towards basically 130 femtoseconds. Measurements were made on that. They not necessarily offer, let's say, interesting wavelengths for as far as imaging at 920 and excitation at 1 micron is concerned. Hence, basically, of course, the let's say the wide range of capabilities of these lasers, but when one really focuses on imaging and excitation, considering let's say a really cost-efficient solution with 1 or 2 wavelengths may just be sufficient. Those lasers were water-cooled, and basically the ROI to be expected and the total cost of ownership on these sapphire lasers, let's say, obviously take quite a big amount of time in order to be amortized. Contrarily, some basically laser solutions have actually risen up basically in the last years, and we basically were pioneers for basically compact, pretty efficient, high peak power lasers, offering very robust and compact lasers at 920 by introducing basically back in January 2018 the first 1 watt and 920, and then basically mid 2018 introducing 2 watts. What is important here to consider is that the size of these femtosecond fiber-based technology laser is actually 1/15 of the volume of a sapphire. They're light, they're affordable, and they offer multiple options that are not, not offered by SAF. AOM fiber delivery, larger GDD precompensation, and matched power levels. Just like I mentioned, we now have basically 2 watts at 920, but also at 1064, and up to 4 watts at 920 and 5 watts at 1 micron. 1064 or different wavelengths at 1 micron. Pulse duration is always maintained underneath 100 femtoseconds due to the fact that we actually rely on the fiber. We offer discrete wavelengths, basically, though the most useful ones, just like I mentioned, for research throughout the world right now, at 920 nanometers and at 1064 for being the standard at 1 micron, but we have also other customization capability at 1 micron. These light and compact femtosecond fiber-based lasers are air-cooled and they're really plug and play. Unpacking a laser, I'm talking about, of course, Spark Lasers ALCOR here, but it actually takes no more than 3 minutes really from unpacking to reaching the, let's say, the full average power of that laser. And obviously fast ROI and maintenance free. These lasers are air cooled. They have a fast ROI just simply due to the fact that, I mean, we're considering basically 2 to 3 times, lower cost as opposed to tie sapphire. This is a picture showing, for instance, a well-known tie sapphire on an optical setup versus basically an ALCOR laser, offering 2 watts at 920 and another one in the back just right there that was the same at 2 watts and 1 micron. We offer different average power, just like I mentioned, but we also right now, even though of course the let's say the increase of power that tie sapphire can offer nowadays, we've just released in the very beginning of this year a 4-watt laser at 920, and just like I mentioned previously, a 5-watt at 1064, which offer, of course, more energy and more average power than any tie sap or any other basically fiber laser worldwide at the time being. What makes ALCOR such a unique solution for multi-photon microscopy? ALCOR, just like I mentioned before, and this has always been our target, was to offer some very small size, compact and robust laser with, let's say, cutting edge performance with basically wavelengths just like 920 nanometers. That was not an easy laser to build and develop, and it had taken us basically a lot more years to develop, really. But so basically the focus was on compactness, robustness, average power, and performances that we had to keep basically pretty high. 5 minutes setup and use maximum, and low maintenance cost. These were the 4 targets we had, let's say, back early 2018 and basically up to 3 years before. Why ALCOR and why 920 and 1 micron? Well, simply for the fact that most of the green fluorophores, proteins, and opsins are excited at around 920 nanometers. So basically, the peak imaging and excitation of these opsins is actually met at 920 nanometers. Same for 1064. We give examples over here of M cherry and TD tomato, but most of the red camps are being excited and basically have a peak excitation at around 1.064, so 1064 nanometer as a wavelength. So just like I mentioned, 1 watt, 2 watt, 4 watts at 920, and 1 watt, 2 watt, 5 watts at 1064. Key points, we've always embedded group delay dispersion precompensation standardly in every single ALCOR we've manufactured. And we've obviously enlarged that range with more complex setups being installed and on use throughout labs around the world. Same thing for synchronization. It's always been offered as a standard, and I'll get back to that later on. Which optical structure for the ALCOR and what laser technology? Well, ALCOR actually relies on an 80 megahertz cedar as a standard, and optionally at basically 40 megahertz, but also some other customization possibilities. We rely on a flexible fiber and multiple amplifiers basically to allow more gain in that fiber and capability of reaching higher average power than traditional tie sapphires with more energy basically going out of the laser output. Compressor, of course, needed to obtain femtosecond pulse duration below 100 femtoseconds. Basically, typically 95. Reality is we were even lower than that right now. So it all starts from a picosecond, sorry, high megahertz cedar, and some amplifiers doping, let's say a medium at 920, and basically a compressor in order to generate sub 100 femtosecond pulses, and some isolator, of course, in order to prevent any unwanted back reflections. This is for the standard ALCOR. Key features of the ALCOR series right now. So basically less than 100 femtosecond as for being a standard, up to 80 megahertz as a cedar, different capabilities, just like I mentioned, 40 megahertz or customize upon request, from 1 watt to 4 watts at 920, up to 5 watts, so 1 to 5 watts at 1064, a capability of using either a single header or a dual header with one and only rack controller, whichever the power, 1, 2, 4/5 watts at 1064. Air-cooled for all of the range, no maintenance, though, and of course, service contracts. Frequency synchronization with sync out, other capabilities I'll be talking about later, and GDD precompensation that is tunable and electronically, basically throughout the GUI, or obviously throughout the serial communication protocol that we provide and supply with our lasers. Standard GDD precompensation from 0 down to 60,000 femtoseconds, minus 60,000 femtoseconds square, or positive and negative, starting from minus 30,000 femtoseconds square and up to plus 30,000 femtoseconds square. This is for the standard GDD precomp, and optionally a capability of going from 0 down to minus 90,000 femtoseconds square for very, very long optical setups, and let's say real thick optical setups, basically. Or as well a capability of going down to minus 45K up to plus 45K femtosecond square. Applications, obviously, well, neuroscience to fund microscopy, multi-fund imaging, and excitation, up to genetics and overall neuroscience. Group delay dispersion precompensation. What is it? Why is this so important? When actually delivering a laser, that laser has a pulse duration that is basically oftentimes on either 100 femtosecond. The fact of using a negative GDD precompensation or a positive, depending basically how the optical setup is built, that GDD precompensation, for as far as we're concerned, is a sliding bar, or actually, let's say, a toolbox where one can actually enter any figures within the span that I just mentioned in the previous slide, in order to precompensate, let's say, from 0 down to minus 60, minus 90 femtosecond square. And that allows one thing, to keep the very same pulse duration from the laser output throughout optics, in order to have the very, very same pulse duration onto samples. If not using GDD precompensation, let's say the dispersion that will be induced by optics will actually lead the pulse duration to be enlarged, not anymore basically being at less than 100 femtoseconds, but being widened basically time-wise, basically till reaching some multiple hundreds of femtoseconds, if not picosecond pulse duration. That is the reason why the precompensation will balance the dispersion that is induced by multiple optics setups. This for free space, but we can also maintain that capability of GDD precompensation with an accessory that we released in the very beginning of this year for being a fiber delivery. I'll talk about that a bit later. Let's enter what we basically call the revolution of two-photon microscopy as far as ALCOR is concerned, obviously. New in 2020, this year, in the very beginning of this year, we introduced several things. We introduced in the end of last year a capability of having, let's say, dual headers basically with the ALCOR, one at 920, one at 1064, keeping whichever average power customer may want, with basically two headers and one and only rack for controlling electronics basically. In the beginning of this year, we introduced a 4 watt at 920, 4 watt laser at 920 nanometers, and basically a 4 watt at 1064 that has become basically a 5 watt ultimately at 1064 nanometers, keeping the same, let's say underneath 100 femtosecond pulse duration, plus some other functionalities and features basically. The Excite module, which is basically a power module and power adjustment external module that can be plugged basically directly on the laser output, allowing for basically a couple of things: fast gating with TTL signal in less than 1 microsecond response time, and also basically another capability with an analog signal modulation with the same basically response time below 1 microsecond. What does that mean? It means that for a 2 watt ALCOR laser at 920 or 1064, we end up having more than 1.5 watts coming out from the external modulation of the Excite module. We also released on the market a 2 meter long hollow core delivery fiber for which is basically let's say polarization maintained, being based basically on either an FCPC or an FCA PC fiber with different kinds of collimators, being 1.3, 2.4, or 4 millimeter as beam diameters. This means that using a flex fiber from a 2 watt laser, whichever the wavelength, we actually can maintain an average power of slightly more than 1 watt after that fiber. And that is when this module is coupled, let's say basically with, the laser directly. The Flexsight is the capability of offering both this fine and fast power control and modulation from the Excite, and as well that 2 meter long hollow core fiber called Flex. So on the one hand, we get Excite, which is the module. On the other hand, we have the Flex fiber, all coupled together. We can maintain basically beyond 1 watt after everything through the module and through the fiber. This is available, of course, at 920 and at 1 micron. The Excite module is obviously an AOM module plus basically some fair amount of developments of electronics that we've actually packaged and embedded for two reasons. The reason of having that power modulation and adjustment possible was actually in order to basically provide a turnkey solution for researchers, in order to prevent them from, facing time-consuming realignment every morning, and also having to buy some buckle cells that are basically comprised between $15,000 and $25,000. So we wanted to offer something additional to that laser, allowing them to be more efficient, not having to waste time onto basically optical setups, and also maximize their capabilities of research, offering something that is fully electronic and that can actually provide a modulation from 0 up to 100%, either directly and internally or externally, basically using either TTL or analog signals. So that was actually the purpose of it. Some let's say reality of what is the GUI we offer. So it's an on and off button in order to start or actually turn off the laser. Alignment mode or full power mode basically, and a capability if coupled, the GDD precompensation, that is standard from 0 down to minus 60,000 standardly, or minus 90,000 femtosecond square optionally, and plus or minus capabilities either way on that GDD precompensation. AOM modulation, when coupled with the excite module with an internal modulation, just like it is right now, or an external one using either TTL or analog modulation when coupled with the excite. That capability of modulating the power level is just by entering any figures from 0 up to 100% within that bar over here. All parameters can be selected on the fly without having to turn on and off the laser all the time. So that is what the GUI offers as a capability, and also the serial communication protocol. This is a picture explaining how the fast TTL modulation, once again, switching laser on and off within less than 1 microsecond is done. So we actually couple, let's say, basically the modulation to the gate in port on the rear panel of the rack controller, and then we basically have a TTL, fast and fine TTL modulation using the gate-in capability. Electrical signal being in blue and optical signal being actually in yellow over here. Important to watch out at the frequency here. And we also provide an analog modulation, just like I mentioned. Yeah, fast analog modulation using the mode-in SMA BNC port, also available on the rear panel of the rack controller. We see signal, electrical signal in blue and optical signal in yellow as well. Have a look at the frequency over here as well. That gives let's say, good understanding of what the laser is capable of providing in terms of signals and modulation. ALCOR Flexsight. So we talked about the excite module, giving access to power modulation and power adjustment from 0 to 100%. Let's say either directly from the GUI or let's say using TTL or analog signal. We're going to talk about the Flexsight, which is the combo between the excite module and the flex fiber, which is, I recall, a 2-meter long ALCOR fiber with basically FCPC or FCA PC fiber with different kinds of collimators between, let's say, either 1.3 millimeter, 2.4 or 4 millimeter beam diameter, let's say after coupling the fiber in the collimator. Wavelength available at 920 and at 1064, rep rate at 80 megahertz. Also available basically optionally at 40 megahertz or any customized rep rate really. Average power after the let's say the module and the fiber slightly above 1 watt, basically above well above 1.5 watt if only with the excite, and above 1 watt if coupled with the excite module and the fiber. GDD pre-comp is maintained from 0 down to minus 20,000 femtosecond square, or basically between, let's say from minus 10,000 femtosecond square up to plus 10,000 femtosecond square at the time being. We're working on expanding that GDD range as well, but we have to go through basically an external module for power modulation and through a fiber. Single mode fiber, stable, clean, output beam profile. One can actually twist the laser. There is no, bending the radius is not changing and modifying any of the pulse duration characteristics, any of the pulse specification, whether temporally or spatially. It's linearly polarized, just like I mentioned. Fast power modulation is kept because there is the excite module and the fiber, but still modulation in less than 1 microseconds. Everything is still air cooled. Pulse duration is slightly enlarged though, mostly due to the length of the fiber. So not anymore underneath basically 100 femtoseconds, but basically underneath 120 femtoseconds, typically 110. Why did we develop that fiber delivery coupling capability? Well, for researchers having a confocal microscope within their lab, that fiber gives, let's say, a direct possibility of injecting the beam and the pulse duration into confocal microscopes. And this is something we're currently working on with different brands, but this is definitely something that was required and requested by some users in the market, and this is definitely something we're currently investigating. For the ones of you who actually have any questions, I'd like to remind you that there will be a Q&A sessions after this, and we may actually, if not really much having the time to do that now, we'll be absolutely pleased to answer your questions by email and get back to you. Pulse characteristics at fiber output. Well, it's a 2 meter long fiber cable that we use. Pulse durations in large, just like I mentioned. But basically, the pulse is kept absolutely clean. Pulse shape is not affected by twisting or bending of the fiber, just like I mentioned before. And the GDD pre-comp keeps being adjustable and is still available through the Excite module and also through the fiber and through both, basically. Power and pulse stability at fiber output over 1 watt through the module, the Excite module, and through the fiber, tested under various environmental conditions, just like one can see over here. Pulse durations on the y-axis, on the left x-axis shows actually testing time, and on the right axis, sorry, we actually display ambient temperatures under which this ALCOR plus Flexsight capabilities was actually tested. So we can see that there's a highly stable average power with RMS stability, let's say, being 0.13% basically over 14 hours, let's say 14 plus hours, stable pulse duration and average power, whichever ambient temperature was used. As a sum up, we show what a standard ALCOR is. ALCOR plus Excite gives actually, this shape of a laser. One thing I didn't mention that is let's say necessary to know is that the laser can be used horizontally, but also twisted and flipped onto its right-hand side, where we then have the injection of the beam here straight into a microscope or into an optical setup, sharp at 12 centimeters from the optical table when this laser is flipped on the right, on the left-hand side, sorry. If coupled to the AOM, this capability also exists. We have different ways of blocking the laser head, even though pretty stable and not moving. We have different clamps, but we also use different M4 or M6 holes on, let's say, whichever the side of the laser. For those of you who would actually need to have answers on this, please get back to us on the chat panel that is on the right-hand side of your screen. When actually coupling a standard ALCOR plus an Excite and a fiber, we've obtained an ALCOR Flexsight over here, which gives that shape of a laser plus the fiber. All accessories, whether Excite, Flex, or both Flexsight, can be procured and supplied after your first basically procurement of the standard ALCOR. In other words, whichever the accessory or option you may need, being basically power modulation with the Excite or fiber delivery, we can actually supply you with on-site installation later on in time, should that be a need for you. And just like I introduced before, then this year we introduced, let's say, an ALCOR 920 4-watt laser, which coupled with an Excite gives a 3-watt laser overall after the output of the, let's say, power modulation module, which is the Excite. So if not coupled with the module, then it's a 4-watt laser, less than 130 femtosecond, typically 120 femtoseconds, with a CDR of 80 megahertz, let's say emitting 4 watts from the laser output at 920 nanometers. Synchronization also possible externally. Computer controlled GDD precompensation up to minus 90,000 femtosecond square as an option, minus 60,000 standard, same as other ALCORs basically. Same form factor as the standard ALCOR, same footprint, same everything for the standard laser, but also for the Excite module. When coupled to the Excite module for fine and fast control, that laser, even though at 4 watt from, let's say, basically the standard ALCOR laser head, has the exact same capabilities as the 1 watt or 2 watts ALCOR. But except for basically the power that's emitted after this Excite module, which is then of 3 watts. We show a, let's say, an average power curve here over 8 hours, showing that we have, of course, basically 4+ watts over 8 hours, with about the same RMS stability as before, for being 0.13, 0.15%. Some applications right now that, you know, just to give an illustration of all we've been talking about. Some comparison between a well-known Thai sapphire here with the same characteristics, except that we have more power, and so basically at the end of the day, more power on sample, so hence a little more energy. But this is a similar application, exciting basically GFT, beta-actin, and SHG basically conversion onto let's say a mouse cortex. So we see more brilliance, more contrast, as opposed to the Thai sap. Here we also show basically a mouse cortex light imaging expressing GCAM6 on a mouse brain for an in vivo 2-photon calcium imaging of neonatal mouse brain. And we clearly see here the areas that were imaged and expressed with different, let's say, time analysis. 2-photon imaging of a mouse brain, again, for brain slice, basically. That was a 2-photon imaging on a mouse brain showing apical dendrites of cortical neurons expressing GCAM with some stains of alexafluor at 488 nanometers with an ALCOR 922 watts. We'll actually get back to that video a bit later on, and we'll see some zebrafish, let's say, retinal ganglion expressing some calcium imaging, let's say, with GCAM protein. We'll get back to that right after. Here we show also basically some imaging at 920 nanometers for GFP, sorry, labeled microglial cells into zebrafish, where we obtained some very good results using a Blake Photonics microscope system, which is a VMS for basically multi-photon video rate microscopy system. Coupled with their Excitation for basically scanning different areas at a time, and basically having some brilliant images of zebrafish. We also repeated that on a mouse ovary cells, expressing again some GCAM6 with their SLAM super resolution module. And their VMS multi-photon microscope expressing GFP and also TD tomato, basically, as long as I recall. Some publications that can be accessed on our website now for different research that were actually achieved by different groups throughout the world. Everything can be accessed on spark-lasers.com/press. where we actually have an article about our 4-watt 920 nanometer laser within laser focus world. One testimony from basically one of our customers at Harvey Lab, Harvard Medical School, basically. Another one that actually was made by Jared Chan, Boston University, where he actually gives out his testimony on his paper with the use of basically an ALCOR and an Altair laser at 1 micron. And some other ranges that we also provide on the market for deep simulation using that Altair, which is basically the big brother between brackets of the Altair of the ALCOR, offering up, let's say, from 10 watts up to 20 watts at 80 megahertz, or basically 5 watts up to 10 watts at 10 to 20 watts at 80 megahertz, or 5 and 10 watts at 40 megahertz, providing up to 1.5 megawatt of peak power, up to 250 natojoules per pulse, including GDD, including remote control, of course, just like the ALCOR, for through TCP/IP for fast and live intervention. Some capabilities for the Altair as well, AUM for pulse picking, while keeping actually the exact same amount of energy, and an ALM for fine and fast power modulation, just like we actually had talked about for the ALCOR. The diagram for optogenetics, which is on use, of course, let's say in the United States at Harvard, but also basically in Norway, which is used for OPA pumping and different, basically, let's say, optogenetics applications for multiple areas being excited at one time. It's a 1030 or 1064 nanometer laser, offering different average powers from 10 watts up to 30 watts, from single shot up to 40 megahertz, with tunable pulse duration from 350 femtoseconds up to 10 picoseconds, with really high peak power up to 115 megawatts, and different energy level per pulse, basically from 10 up to 40 microjoules. Negative GDD precompensation, let's say, which is quite huge. Centrally embedded AUM for pulse picking and or let's say power modulation with sync in, sync out capabilities, and remote control capability through TCP/IP as well, just equal to the one on the ALCOR range or the Altair range. Some other in vivo two-photon calcium imaging photostimulation made by, let's say, Chris Harvey at Harvard using the diadem. Some other experiments made using the Altair in Japan for multi-photon excitation and, let's say, within the spinning disc confocal microscope. This was made basically at the Nikon Imaging Center in Hokkaido. And now I'm going to thank you very much for your attention, everybody. I'm going to, let's say, have Marco proceed now.
Many thanks from my side as well. We will just get to a short Q&A real quick. 1 second. First question was, is there a possibility to get a demo laser possibly for several weeks?
This is definitely doable, depending, of course, because we have high demand on lasers and on demos. But absolutely, this is a possibility that needs to be, of course, analyzed on a case-by-case basis. But this is definitely possible, yeah.
Is it possible to combine the ALCOR with a fiber?
Yeah, absolutely. Combining the ALCOR without the Excite module directly with the fiber is definitely doable. We already supplied, let's say, a few ALCOR combined with basically a 1 watt or a 2 watt laser without necessarily having to use the modulation, the power modulation. So yeah, ALCOR plus Flex is also a possibility.
All right, we get one more question here. How is the laser light coupled into the fiber while maintaining stability?
This is something we'll definitely need to answer in writing because basically that will take probably a bit of time. But I'll be absolutely pleased to answer that by email to the questioner.
All right. Perfect. Thank you very much. There are no further questions for now. If there are, please do not hesitate to contact us at any time. Laser 2000 is as we said, Laser 2000 is the contact for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, at least the German-speaking side. If you are not sure, please do contact us at any time. We will just forward everything to Guillaume personally. Wait a second. There's one more question. Actually, just came in. Is it possible to use your lasers for terahertz generation?
Yes, indeed.
Well, this was quick. All right.
It was quick, but it is definitely possible. The best here would be to actually email us the demand, just so we can actually analyze the need. But yeah, it's already been done, so I'm positive on that.
Perfect. So if there's any other question, we have a few minutes more time. If there's something, please now. If it is not, I will take the time to welcome you to our next free webcast, who's going to be on the 9th of September. And it is about hyperspectral imaging for agriculture from Resonon. Please tune in, please sign up. And if that is all, I will thank you again and wish you a very nice day. Thank you, Guillaume.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Laser 2000 and Marco. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.